Thank you. And then the final talk before the panel is Rosanne Freak-Poli.
Thanks for having me. I'm from Monash University, which is in Melbourne, Australia. I'll just wait for my talk to appear. Hi. You having trouble? Yeah, that looks good. Fantastic. So today I'm going to be talking to you about who is lonelier. I did an age-period-cohort analysis and also looked at generational effects. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which I predominantly work and live, the Wurundjeri-Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, as well as the traditional owners of the many lands on which you may work and live. I pay my respects to the elders past and present and the elders of other communities who may be here today. So this paper started when I was invited to present my findings at an inquiry from the New South Wales government looking into the prevalence, causes and impacts of loneliness. And rewatching, it's on YouTube, so rewatching all of the interviews over the 2 days, effectively what they were asking us researchers was, who is lonelier? And because data is so varied and we can look at it so many different ways, as we heard from the prior speaker, that we very much confused them because depending on where we work, we're finding data to support our research. So unfortunately, loneliness is not just in Australia, it is also here in the US. The Surgeon General Murphy heard repeatedly, if I disappear tomorrow, no one will even notice. And that's why he declared loneliness as an epidemic in America and identified it as a root cause contributing to significantly to numerous social issues. Now, the US and Australia are not alone, and the World Health Organization has also declared loneliness as a global public health concern. I'd like to highlight that I believe that social health and loneliness is a systems issue, not a personal issue. So social health relates to someone's abilities to adapt in social situations and form satisfying, meaningful relationships, and how someone interacts with and is supported by other people, institutions and services. So the institutions and services need to be available. So it's a systems issue. Today I'm focusing on loneliness, but we are also repeating this analysis for social isolation in the same cohort. And loneliness can be defined as a subjective, distressing, emotional state where someone perceives a discrepancy between their desired and actual social relationships. So loneliness is linked to health, and I wanted to highlight a few of my contributions to the research. First of all, that I find a gender discrepancy. So women are more likely to self-report experiencing loneliness than men, and this is despite women self-reporting lower social isolation and more social support. So there may be different needs based on gender. I've also found that if someone is lonely, they have an increased risk of dying from cardiovascular disease by 255%, as well as an increased risk of dementia between 40 and 215%. Now, these are all different cohorts and different contexts, so but the strength of that will make the strength of association change. But in most studies, we're finding there's a significant relationship. So the aim here was to look at patterns of loneliness across age, period, and cohort, as well as generations. I'm using a nationally representative longitudinal cohort in Australia with 22 annual waves. There is over 300,000 participants aged 15 years or more between 2021 and 2022. This is a special survey where everyone in the households are surveyed, and when they leave that residence, then they're no longer surveyed, and there are replacement samples over time. We define loneliness as a feeling very lonely for 5 or more days of the week. So straight into the results. So when we looked at age, this is raw data, not adjusting for anything, what we found was that as people increased in age by year, they were more likely to get lonelier, and that was similar between men and women. However, there was a little spike for women between ages of 15 and 20. When we looked at period or time in calendar years, we found that at the start of the observation period in 2001, the prevalence was much higher, that it decreased around the year 2009, 2010, and then steadily started to increase until the end of the observation period in 2022. Now, when we looked at generations, we couldn't make a huge amount of sense of this, to be honest. We have the different generations in order there, and it doesn't seem to make any sense in order, but also between men and women, there are different patterns. I will talk about this more right at the end after I show you the next set of results, but I will highlight the Generation Z I'll be discussing, which is the purple line at the very left, so the youngest cohort. So this is an analysis where we put so the APC, Age-Period-Cohort analysis, where you choose a reference and you adjust. So in the top row is where we've adjusted for reference years. So we're selecting the period to adjust for first. In the bottom row, we're choosing the cohort to adjust for. So that's the cohort born in 1950 as a reference group. But it doesn't matter how you look at it and which reference group or that you're choosing. What we're finding here is that it's the midlife that's, in both men and women, they're experiencing the most loneliness. Now, this is not what I expect from the raw data, and it's also not what you'd expect talking to people in Australia, because often we talk about older people being more lonely or the younger people. So I think that this highlights the need to adjust for period and cohort when we're talking about loneliness. Now, when we looked at the period and cohort adjusting for age, period and cohort, we found that the lowest prevalence of loneliness was around year 2010 for both men and women, as well as the birth cohort of the 1970s. I've got 2 slides here. First of all, I just want to highlight these takeaways, which is the high rates of loneliness are concerning regardless. I think it doesn't matter how you look at them. We don't want this proportion of people lonely. If we look by age by year, the raw data indicated high loneliness among older adults, but when we did the APC analysis, it indicated that it's actually amongst midlife, so around 45 to 55 years. When we looked at the period by calendar year, loneliness decreased until 2010 and then increased again. When we look at cohort, loneliness was lowest for those born in the 1970s. And for generation, we found no consistent loneliness patterns across generations or by binary gender. So the second point I want to make is just looking at these 2 generations. So Generation Z is the most recent generation, and then the silent generation is the oldest generation in our cohort. For Generation Z, we're actually unsure whether we do see some higher prevalence there, as you saw, that's the purple in the graph. And we're unsure if this is age, period, or cohort, or a combination, because we found the highest rates particularly for women, aged 15 to 20, but we also found the highest rates were people born after the year 2000 and for survey years after the year 2015. So all 3 ways we're seeing higher rates. For the silent generation, it's particularly for those born in the 1920s and 1930s in our sample, it may reflect outliers and sampling bias. To be clear, they're now 90 to 100 years old and living in the community, so they haven't gone to residential aged care or long-term care, as you call it here, and they constitute a very small and highly selective group. So I just don't want to make any inferences about that group in my study. And I'd just like to thank my intern, Hyung Shung, who's done all this fantastic analysis for me, and I welcome any questions in the panel. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I have a question about the loneliness presentation. So as you it was great, actually, thank you. As you talked about the younger generation and that they're experiencing loneliness, then I wondered about the inclusion and exclusion criteria for who you included, so that are they reliable? In the same way that you said that those that are older in the silent generation, they might not be great historians, or what the sample size is small and the various other considerations. But I also wonder about the younger population and whether or not they're how they are reporting, how they feel. Is it consistent? Is it reliable? What can you say to that?
Yeah, so I agree that it's difficult making assumptions based on both the generations that are younger and older, because we need a bit more data. I think that the context has also changed, because I know that a lot of people in the past has felt that they don't want to say that they're lonely, even though they are lonely, whereas maybe younger generations are actually more open with stating that they're lonely. So it could be a generational difference, or it could be also partly how the world's changed, how we communicate now. And so there's a lot of things that, when we're looking at generations, what might be attributing to these differences. But I am concerned, I'd have to look into a little bit more and look at a bit more of the literature to see exactly what your question is, because I'm not sure how reliable this by itself can be as that high, with those highs, generation said, because it were really high, particularly for women.
Everybody knows a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just wondering, is it really that you're lonely?
Yeah.
In this house with 4 other people?
I love it. I get it.